Welcome back to The Different Knock. Last Tuesday, reliable journalist Florian Plettenberg, one of the first on Harry Kane's move to Bayern Munich, reported that Takehiro Tomiyasu was the subject of a lot of interest from Bayern over the summer. He said the Germans were pushing hard, presumably spurred on by the departure of Benjamin Pavard and some key injuries, and that Bayern's interest has not gone away, and they're supposedly keen for a winter move. When asked about it in Friday's pre-Brentford press conference, Mikel's face didn't flinch, and he didn't try and play it down. He just stressed how important Tomiyasu is to the club and how much we value him. It wasn't necessarily a no. But panic not. The day before, Mike McGrath in The Telegraph had already reported that Arsenal were ready to award Tomiyasu with a new contract, already squashing the barely 2-day-old story. The Arsenal PR manager clearly moves quickly. Despite it seemingly coming to nothing, this mini saga has brought up some interesting questions for Arsenal fans. First, is Tomiyasu interested? After all, it's Bayern. Is it even true, or was it orchestrated by an agent for a better deal, or to force Arsenal's hand? But more broadly, it sparks some questions about how we approach selling in our modern era. And more specifically, would we, could we, should we sell Takehiro Tomiyasu? There'll be some of you watching who immediately shut this down. The idea of selling a player of Tomiyasu's quality, especially in January of all times, is laughable. Another terrific performance against Brentford on Saturday afternoon, despite him not quite having the attacking verve of Ben White, will be fresh in the mind. But others, myself included, have had to mull this over for a little while before coming to any conclusions. Because I think there's more to be discussed here than meets the eye. I'm going to tell you what I personally think at the end of the video. But first, I'm going to present the arguments. So to those of you commenting, you're wrong 2 minutes after a 10-minute video has been posted, I see you. Number 1, flaws and ceilings. Firstly, we have to accept that we're in a different spot squad building wise as we move in to 2024. We can't move our expectations from just about qualifying for Europe to expecting to win the Premier League and Champions League and expect nothing to change about the conversations we have around players. So let's talk floor raisers and ceiling raisers and what's changed. When you're building up a squad to go and eventually challenge for a title, what you're ideally doing, in my view, is largely adding players who are ceiling raisers. Players who you hope can go on to become first teamers for a very long time. For Arsenal, that's players like Declan Rice, Ødegaard, Saliba, Saka. The best, or at least very nearly the best, at what they do. But once you get to that mythical place, challenging for a title, those ceiling raisers become a lot harder to find. The balance tips, and your squad building begins to change, which is where I believe we are now. How do you find a ceiling raiser on Bukayo Saka, I ask? Don't answer that, it's rhetorical. The focus shifts because it has to. Sure, we're still looking for ceiling raisers, but it's probably a case that we're now more looking to raise the floor as close to the ceiling as possible for the maximum quality, as opposed to signing players who are way better than what we already have, because we can't. Tomiyasu is one such floor raiser for us, and I think we need to be really conscious of how important that is and how much more important that will become. Instead of a Rob Holding, Cedric level drop-off in quality when players come out of the team, we get multiple positions covered at a fantastic quality level, arguably as good as a Ben White or a Zinchenko, just different. He's on a good wage, pre-peak, seems happy, and if he's fixed his availability issues, which I always felt were largely down to luck, considering he's actually had different problems rather than a recurring one like Jesus' knee or Partey's hamstrings, then we have a real winner on our hands. So, in that sense, the argument to sell Tomiyasu is a non-starter. You might be saying, well, he isn't in the first team, he's got to be a saleable asset. But I think to argue that really strongly is a misunderstanding of just how important finishers, you guys who are in your first 15 or 16 are now, and just how good Tomiyasu is. Yes, selling him might not remove our ceiling as a team, but the floor of the squad is now more important than it has ever been. Look what happened last season and learn the lessons. We're in the squad era. The first 11 is dead. However, number 2, value and market conditions. You have to look around the market. We don't exist in a vacuum. All of the previous justification for not selling Tomiyasu is based on the idea that there's no one better for the squad role and position. Who are you going to get in, especially in January, who can do what Tomiyasu can do? But I think a lot of Arsenal fans argue that without necessarily knowing that to be absolutely true, partly because you can't. We're saying there's no better floor raiser out there, but what if there is? Or what if there's actually a ceiling raiser out there who makes a Ben White, or dare I say it, a Saliba or a Gabriel or a Zinchenko our floor? You and I don't have access to extensive scouting networks, millions of pounds worth of data analytics, expensive football education, and all the resources and contacts a modern football club might have. Unless you're Mikel, in which case, hello and please give me a job. So we can't know for sure if there is or isn't a better player than Tomiyasu out there. But not knowing doesn't mean that there isn't. The argument seems to be we won't get anyone better than him for that role, someone who won't complain, someone who's happy with the minutes, but we literally can't know that. So I think we have to remain open to possibility. I have a few names for you right now. Sure, there's some shiny new toy syndrome here, and I'm not saying they're better now or would guaranteed be better in this environment, but looking at Ousmane Diomande at Sporting Lisbon or Giorgio Scalvini at Atalanta, I can't help but wonder if they might be, however small the margin, an improvement on Tomiyasu as a ceiling raiser or floor raiser. They're possible superstars, and I don't care how much you love Tomiyasu, and I love him, but we can't sit here and say he's going to be the best defender in the world one day. Would they accept his squad role? Would it work as a deal? I don't know, but we're not here to make people happy. We're here to win. More broadly though, big projects sometimes necessitate even, big sales. You simply have to evolve the team over time, which will involve players leaving. It's fact. Time waits for no man. If Bayern are interested and will give us a good fee, we need to at least think about our succession planning. These types of deals where you get good money for a player from a big club don't come along all too often, especially when selling outside of the Premier League, and Brighton's results from good planning speak for themselves. If you're not going to sell the players who don't consistently get in your first team, then who are you going to sell? Just a reminder at this point, I don't necessarily agree with this. I'm just presenting the argument. Liverpool are the perfect example of selling at the right time. An incredible opportunity opened up in January of 2018 to sell a player who looked to be one of the most important at the time for up to 142 million. That is ridiculous money, and considering what happened, seems like a no-brainer. But at the time, many fans protested it. They went out and spent that money on Virgil van Dijk in January and Alisson and Fabinho in the next. We're not going to get that kind of money for Tomiyasu, but the principle stands. Clearly, you need to buy well for that to work, but we do. And a good sale can sometimes kickstart something, because more widely, a good selling culture is important for a football club. Man City sold Cole Palmer, Aymeric Laporte and Riyad Mahrez last summer, Sterling, Jesus and Zinchenko the summer before, and Ferran and Sane the years before that. And you know what they did? They got Haaland, Grealish, Akanji, Alvarez, Doku and more in that time. And I don't think anyone would argue that City have got worse over the last few years. It's evolution. It happens. And it happens partly because they sell at the right time. I think because historically Arsenal have sold poorly and players have gone on to largely come back and haunt us in one way or another, we're reluctant to sell as a fan base. But there's a balancing act to be done here. And at some point, Arsenal will have to make some sales. So it's about asking who that is, when that is, and what's best for the club. At times, you've got to take the money on the table. Ainsley Maitland-Niles for 20 million, anyone? Finally on this, if you're a don't sell at any price person, let me ask you this. Would you sell Tomiyasu for 500 million? Unless you're literally unwell, I think you would. But of course, no one would pay that. However, that proves that there is a biting point that every club will go to. The idea that this player is not for sale, especially in the modern day, is garbage. Money always talks. So, it's about price. What if Bayern offered 90 million? Of course. 80 million? Sure. 70 million? Yeah. 60 million? 50 million? Knowing we're pretty close to the line with FFP based on our approach with the Raya move, maybe we need a sale to do anything, and he might be a sacrifice we're willing to make. Number 3, the player and the system. In the end, where you fall down on this debate is largely going to be based on how good you think the player is. I personally think he's a fantastic squad player who serves an incredible role, but I do wonder about other options sometimes, considering my knowledge gap. I don't think we can assume there isn't a better player. If you think he's a first-team starter just waiting for his moment, I don't agree, but I also don't agree for another reason. Outside of the individual quality, Arsenal's current setup. Sometimes players just get unlucky with the superstars they end up playing with. Recently, we did a deep dive into Tomiyasu on the Patreon and YouTube member side of TDK, and in it, we talked about Tomiyasu's unique body composition. Stocky, broad shoulders, but also long, slender legs that make him perfect for defending. His ability to receive and play off both feet, but perhaps his struggles to create separation in the final third, plus his performances for Japan, point me to thinking Tomiyasu's long-term future, his maximal football potential, will be reached at centre-back. So if that's his long-term future, let's get practical in the short to medium term. He's not getting in at centre-back over William Saliba. I hope that's not controversial. Unless he's injured, he's just not. And the problem is that Gabriel is such a perfect, naturally left-footed, wide-channel defending, aerial monster counterbalance to both Zinchenko and Saliba that Tomiyasu just doesn't get a look in there either. Perhaps if the left-back changed, we might see something change at LCB, but I think with Zinchenko's improvement, I don't know. You could have Kobe Bryant coming through the ranks at the Chicago Bulls in the 90s, it wouldn't have mattered. Michael Jordan is one of the GOATs, and if you want to play shooting guard, you'll have to go somewhere else. Environments, time, and space to flourish is so key for talent development. Can you tell I watched The Last Dance again recently? If Tommy's best position is blocked, and I think for most Arsenal fans, he wouldn't get in over Ben White or Zinchenko right now, with Timber due to return as well, then his pathways are beginning to narrow. You may love the player, you may think he's all right. You may want the player gone, you may not. You might sell for 50 million, you might think we'd only get 25 million, you might ask for 100 million. All I hope I've done is provoke some thought. Now, would I personally do it? Personally, no. Not in January for certain, unless we're getting ridiculous money, and we can also sign a replacement. But that replacement would also need to be better than Tomiyasu, but that's a lot of ifs, and it feels like a big risk in January. However, over the next 18 months, we're going to have some uncomfortable conversations about selling players that we really don't want to sell all that much. Ramsdale, Tierney, Tomiyasu, Nelson, Nketiah, Jorginho, Vieira, Smith Rowe, Kivior. If you're not playing regularly, questions have to be asked. To foster a good selling culture and to ensure players are at their best, you can't only sell when you 100% want to. Sometimes you do have to gamble a bit. I wouldn't sell Tomiyasu, but all I'll say is this: if you stand still in football, you'll start moving backwards. If you like The Different Knock and want to see more, you can access our bonus content on Patreon and YouTube memberships for just £3 a month.